The number 10 greatest Eagle. QB Eagles. Randall Cunningham.
Number 10.
Who would you rank as your top Eagle of all time?
Randall Cunningham,
Why?
no doubt. Randall, I had never seen anything like him before.
Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. It is rocking tonight. The Giants are in town. Third down, goal to go.
Randall faking, now rolling with the football.
Look at that agility. That's something special right there.
I've been watching football for 50 years. I've never seen anything like it.
Randall Cunningham. That is a big-time play.
Cunningham in there. We go two-man combo. We got two-man combo on a reduced. LT Zamir on that, okay?
He was a hard guy to game plan against because you couldn't replicate him. You didn't really see anybody like him. Not only is he fast, but he was hard to tackle.
And we are looking at Rambling Randall once again.
One of the things that was his calling card, every time he got near the end zone, he was going up.
Cunningham leaping, and a marvelous athletic play.
I always say, why do you think you can fly? I said, I'm an eagle.
And so his touchdowns always looked absolutely awesome because he's flying through the air as he gets hit.
It couldn't be more dramatic.
Randall Cunningham's 1990 season, the likes had never been seen before in the NFL. And that's why you have to put him in the top 10.
In 1990, Cunningham threw for almost 3,500 yards and rushed for over 900 yards, combining for 35 touchdowns. One play from that season best summed up his amazing abilities.
Well, you think about the Buffalo escape.
The play that I think about the most was the pass against the Buffalo Bills, where he scrambled in the end zone and he hurled one downfield.
He ducks under three men. He's looking. He's rolling. He's heaving it deep downfield. For Barnett, who leaps and has it. Barnett's going to score! There is nobody does it better than number 12.
Not only does he escape it, he launches a ball 60 yards down the field. Fred Barnett catches it, and the rest is history.
I don't know how he did it.
Even now, I can't believe that he pulled that off.
The ultimate weapon? Are you kidding me? Not one of the best SI covers of all time, the best SI cover of all time.
Cunningham comes in at number 10 because the ultimate weapon was a dud in the playoffs.
So they created a name for Randall the ultimate weapon. He was a weapon to win a playoff game.
A playoff game was all Cunningham won in the 5 games he started for the Eagles in the postseason.
The ultimate weapon, somewhere along the line, you probably win a championship. And that's the one thing he didn't do.
He certainly demands to be in the top 10 of all-time Eagles.
I would not have put him on this top 10 list.
I feel like this is a little low.
Probably wouldn't have put him in 10. Probably would have had him outside my 10.
Number 10? Cunningham is number 10. Is that Cunningham the punter? Because Cunningham the quarterback is clearly better than number 10.
10's about right.
The number 9 greatest Eagle. Harold Carmichael.
Well, obviously, Harold Carmichael's underrated. Every Philadelphia fan knows that.
He's looking for Carmichael. He takes it at the 5. He's in for a touchdown.
I think the greatest receiver in the history of the Philadelphia Eagles is Harold Carmichael. Harold Carmichael dominated, absolutely dominated the game in his era.
Carmichael also dominates the Eagles' record books. Despite playing his last game in 1983, he still holds the franchise records for catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. And in 1980, he set the NFL record for consecutive games with a catch.
127 games with the catch. That's hard.
That was not an era in which receivers had the same number of targets that they get today. That's a remarkable accomplishment.
Who would you rather throw to? Would you rather throw to a guy that's a running back coming out of the backfield? Would you rather throw to a 6'1" guy? Or how about the 6'8" monster running down the field? I'll throw to that guy.
I grew up in Philly watching the Eagles, and Harold Carmichael was the biggest football player you'd ever seen in your life.
I'm standing here talking to perhaps the tallest wide receiver in the National Football League, Harold Carmichael.
Do you know how tall he was? He was 6'8".
6'8"? Harold Carmichael 6'8"? Think about that.
He was an NBA power forward. Imagine lining up and looking up to Harold Carmichael.
And he was unguardable in the end zone. He was the ultimate end zone weapon.
Made my job easy. I mean, I knew where Harold was going to be. The minute we get inside the 5-yard line, no matter what we had called, we had some sort of signal. We called it meet me at the corner. Even great defense couldn't stop Harold Carmichael.
Oh my God, and the thing about Harold Carmichael, and I'm surprised the Eagles probably wouldn't let him on the list, because who did he have his last reception with? Dallas Cowboys. He played 2 games, he had 1 catch for 7 yards. You know how much he'd like to get rid of that 1 catch? That is the blemish on his record.
The fact that Harold's numbers still, stand up as number 1 with the Eagles organization, when you think of the plethora of wide receivers that have gone through this town, and Harold's still number 1, that says a lot about what he did.
Jaworski throws the pass for Carmichael at the 5. Touchdown Eagles!
Harold Carmichael is a great receiver, and I don't think really gets his just due in the ranks of the NFL. Not just the Eagles. He was a great Eagle, but I think he should be in the Hall of Fame.
The number 8 greatest Eagle, Jerome Brown.
I always thought when you thought about the Buddy Ryan defense, Reggie White was the best player, and Seth Joyner was the smartest player. But Jerome, he was the fire in the middle of that defense. On days when he really had it going, he could take a game over.
He was the heart and soul. He was the heart and soul.
Tremendous defensive play by Jerome Brown.
That defense was one of the best ever, and he was in the middle of everything.
Bateman steps up, and then he takes a hit, sacked by Jerome Brown.
Jerome Brown was strong. I mean, country strong. People could not run where Jerome Brown was, and he was unbelievable at pushing the pocket. He was a dominant player.
Jerome just beat the center and got straight through the field.
The quickness that he had for his body type and his size was just off the charts.
Big Jerome Brown, he's a load.
You kind of generally draft and cast and play defensive tackles by the idea that here's our run defender, here's our pass rusher. It wasn't easy to find a guy that could be both in one package, and Jerome was.
Our number 8 Eagle's immense talent was outshined only by his oversized personality.
Jerome Brown constantly moving and constantly talking.
Jerome Brown's personality, first of all, was larger than life. He was just kind of a fun guy who loved to play football, and that endeared himself to the city of Philadelphia.
Jerome Brown was like a talk radio caller to WIP, decided to put on a Philadelphia Eagles uniform and then also be good. He was an extension of Philadelphia.
He was very fun-loving, very charismatic.
When you come down the backyard and you try to start something, you always get your butt kicked.
But when you get on the field, I think everybody on the opposing team was scared to death of him.
Brown played just 5 seasons in Kelly Green due to a fatal car accident in 1992. His short tenure with the team has led to the debate about his inclusion on this list.
Does he deserve to make the list? That's an interesting question.
I think Jerome Brown was a phenomenal player, but 5 years, hard to earn that top 10 ranking.
When you talk about greatest Eagles, I think dominance for a short period should be appreciated. He should be highlighted for that.
Jerome Brown should absolutely be on this list. I don't think that there was anybody who was more perfect for Philadelphia than Jerome Brown.
Does he deserve to be on the list? It's a question now that you ask me. I'm going to be thinking about this for days. Does he deserve it? Now you gave me something to think about.
The number 7 greatest Eagle, Tommy McDonald.
I don't know a lot about him. Tommy McDonald is the Eagles player that your dad talked about, that you haven't really seen a lot, but I know he's an Eagles great.
Tom McDonald is downfield in time to pull in the pass for a touchdown.
Little Tommy McDonald is Van Brocken's most explosive receiver. Tommy's brilliant speed and sure hands will pose a constant threat.
Standing just 5'9", Tommy McDonald is the shortest member of our list. but he still made a big impact, leading the NFL in receiving yards once and receiving touchdowns twice.
For him to have done that at that size is ridiculous, especially in that era where you're allowed to do anything defensively. And little Tommy McDonald still making plays.
Tiny Tommy McDonald was the last man on the playing field to know when it began to rain. But he compensated for his short stature with a hearty appetite for gobbling up any pass thrown his way.
Best hands in football. The best. Capital T, capital B. The Sports Illustrated cover, Pro Football's Best Hands, 100% true. His hands were phenomenal.
Tommy McDonald makes a fantastic grab in the end zone.
At Franklin Field, there were these cement pillars. He would literally walk over, scratch the palms and the inside of his hand on those things to make them tough and calloused so he could catch any football. I mean, these guys now wear gloves. Tommy McDonald's rubbing his hand on cement to catch the ball.
Yeah. You gotta love that, don't you?
That actually looks good, yeah.
That looks good. I mean, that's kind of what his personality is. But he's a Hall of Fame player. And who else brings a jam box to their Hall of Fame enshrinement ceremony?
Eat your heart out. Yeah!
There's no one having more fun than Tommy McDonald. You can only attempt to match his level of fun. And that's what Tommy McDonald did during his Hall of Fame speech.
Move over, Ronald McDonald. There's another McDonald in Canada, and we're both going to sell hamburgers. Big Macs and Little Macs.
It was so genuine, and it was so funny, and it was so him, that the audience totally got into it, and they were laughing, and they were clapping.
I'm supposed to have good hands.
At the end of the whole ceremony, Lamar Hunt said, "Can we induct Tommy McDonald every year? That guy's a riot."
Thank you, Kenton. I love it.
I think 7's a good spot for him. I think now he would be your prototype slot receiver. Julian Edelman, Amendola, except better than those guys, even more productive.
Tommy McDonald, think of him as the Antonio Brown of his time.
Antonio Brown! Sensational! Tommy McDonald takes a backseat to no one in the NFL when it comes to catching passes.
Let me tell you, Tommy McDonald was a fantastic player. You go back, you look at his numbers, especially in that era, pretty awesome.
The number 6 greatest Eagle, Pete Pihos.
I think that Pihos is probably the most underrated great player in the history of the franchise.
Adrian Burke loops a pass to Pete Pihos, who makes a somersaulting touchdown catch.
He was the premier receiver in the league after Don Hudson retired.
Led the league in receiving 3 years in a row, which no Eagles receiver has ever done.
Scored winning touchdown in a championship game.
Pete Pihos gathers it in, and the Philadelphia Eagles win their second World Championship.
I love Pete Pihos. I do. I know this sounds like I'm joking. I'm not. Because he was listed as an end.
Bobby Thomason puts the Eagles in the sky with a pitch to veteran end Pete Pihos, a glue-handed Hoosier on the Chicago 41.
Back in the day where you didn't have tight ends, just had end.
Ends at that point were usually just kind of blockers and essentially another offensive lineman.
I never thought of an end actually receiving passes before a guy like Pete Pihos.
While he may not have been listed as a tight end, Pihos revolutionizing a position earned him the number 6 spot on our list.
Tight ends didn't come along for another decade.
You have guys that are now #1 targets on offenses.
Back goes Foles, fires, slant, touchdown! Zach Ertz!
Because of a guy like Pete Pihos. What if we take this extra tackle we had and said, let's run him out on a pattern and see what happens? Hall of Fame career, 2 championships.
Once he met Joe DiMaggio in Atlantic City, and Joe DiMaggio said to him, he said, "Pete, the one thing you got to do is you got to retire on top." Pihos said that made an impression on him.
Pete Pihos playing his last game before the hometown folks makes a great catch of an Adrian Burke pass for a touchdown.
He certainly could have kept playing, but he thought 52, led the league in receiving. Maybe it's time to step aside, and he did.
Little known fact about Pete Pihos is he was a double for Ronald Reagan in some of the movies in the 40s and 50s. I made that up.
And now, coming in at number 5 is number 5, Donovan McNabb.
Where do you begin with Donovan?
The beginning, when Eagle fans and Donovan McNabb met for the first time at the 1999 draft.
I think between him and Ricky Williams, and they wanted Ricky Williams.
I bet you can see my heart bumping.
With the second pick, the Philadelphia Eagles select Donovan McNabb, quarterback, Syracuse University.
I hope the fans don't take it out on Donovan McNabb.
No, they better not.
They really better not.
Yeah, that was a bunch of nitwits. They were dopes. These guys wanted Ricky Williams. How did that turn out?
His numbers are phenomenal, and he turned out to be the absolute right pick in 1999.
He's probably the best quarterback in the history of this franchise.
McNabb made 6 Pro Bowls and led the Eagles to the playoffs in 7 of his 9 seasons as a starter, all the while doing it with a less than stellar cast of wide receivers for all but one of those seasons.
It was Donovan McNabb and the McNabbettes, because you had no idea who his receivers were.
He had, God, it's tough to remember.
Freddie Mitchell.
Oh, we had Todd Kingston, James Thrash,
Kevin Curtis.
He really had one true wide receiver, a difference maker. And we know who that was. That was T.O.
The addition of T.O. in 2004 produced McNabb's best season, throwing for 31 touchdowns and only 8 interceptions.
Donovan moves around a lot. He makes plays, very nimble for a big guy as a quarterback.
What a great athlete he is!
What skills. He's got about 3 defenders to beat, and he beats every one of them.
Obviously, strong arm.
And that is the luxury that McNabb, until this year, never had.
You bad? Huh? You pretty damn awesome, too.
In 2004, the Eagles finally made the Super Bowl after 3 straight NFC Championship game defeats. McNabb went 1-4 in conference title games and lost his only Super Bowl appearance.
It's both a great accomplishment and also depressing, because he made it there, and then he lost a bunch.
Is he the best quarterback in Eagles history? Yes, but he didn't win the big game.
He was one of the best football players on the planet, and yet the only 3 things that anybody remembers in Philadelphia are booing him at the draft, him trying to sell us chunky soup.
Chunky beef with country vegetables now has more beef.
And then him throwing that soup up in the Super Bowl. That's it. Those are the 3 Donovan McNabb takeaways that we have from an excellent decade-long career.
Throws up. Right in the middle of the huddle, right? Him and his mom did the Campbell. Can't eat Campbell before the game.
My rule is, if you think you should throw up, maybe let it out. Because if you put it down, where does it go next? You only have so many orifices.
Number 5 will always love you.
For once, our experts agreed we got it right, with number 5 landing at 5.
Full marks to top 10. Makes sense that number 5 is at number 5.
I love that we have McNabb at 5. That's like a funny wink.
5 is an appropriate number. It's his number. He will always love us.
I think 5's perfect for him. Yeah, I think 5's a very good spot for number 5, and he'll always love you.
The number 4 greatest Eagle, Brian Dawkins.
And when he came out the tunnel, he was in another world.
As a teammate, we would all try to make sure we got in position so that we could see him and what he was going to do that week. He never disappointed with his entry onto the field.
The stadium was shaking when he would come out.
And on top of that, the motivational speeches. Who wouldn't want to go play football after Brian Dawkins led them?
That thing that's beating your doggone chest right now. Can you feel that? Bring what you got to the doggone table, man. Give it to me. Let's do what they say we can't do, and let's shut these people up real quick in a hurry.
His buzzwords are respect or disrespect.
They don't respect us.
Dog on it and gosh dog it.
God Dawkins. We gonna dominate this thing. Respect is not given, it is earned, God Dawkins.
Brian Dawkins, very intense. Good job, Brian Dawkins. I'm intimidated.
He was like, Spikes, I'm gonna take his soul. And I was like, what? I'm gonna take his soul. I wanna see how bad he wants to play. Next play, they run a route behind me. Brian Dawkins, boom! I said, oh my goodness. He gets up over him and just say, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus. I don't know what he's on, but I want some before the next game, though. I like B. Dawkins.
Can you imagine getting hit by that guy? Like, I'm shocked that there are players out there who got hit by him and got up and said, yeah, put me back in the game.
You better tell him to get it down, Cooley. Hit me all you want. Yeah, but you gonna feel it, Cooley. I'm telling you, you gonna feel it.
Cooley catches the football. Dawkins comes up and just hammers it.
Brian Dawkins might be best known for his bone-rattling hits.
What he can do is level a pop, and boy, he does.
But the Hall of Fame safety was one of the most versatile players in NFL history.
You could watch a game and see him get a strip sack.
Dawkins made the hit. Dawkins recovered the fumble.
You could see him get an interception.
Far. He is firing deep. Brian Dawkins interception.
He is the only man in NFL history with more than 25 interceptions, more than 25 sacks, more than 25 forced fumbles.
Brian Dawkins brought something that I don't think anybody else had ever brought to the table.
There is no one in Eagles history that embodies the Philadelphia Eagles like Brian Dawkins. No one.
If you asked Eagles fans their favorite player, Brian Dawkins is number one.
In Philadelphia, he might be the most beloved Eagle maybe ever.
And if there is a guy that you would say, what is the player that personifies the Philadelphia fan base? It'd be Brian Dawkins.
When you just rank him in terms of love, yeah, you're top three. But I think a four is a perfect spot for Dawkins.
You're talking about some great players there, so I don't have a big problem with him being 4.
The number 3 greatest Eagle, Steve Van Buren.
Mr. Van Buren here, number 1, has a great name because he sounds like an old president from the 1800s, which is how I like my football players. To sound like they've dragged us into the French-Canadian War or something.
And just like some early presidents, the accomplishments of Steve Van Buren are lost on today's generation.
It's unfortunate it was so long ago that I don't think people fully appreciate how great the guy was.
Gives the ball to Van Buren, and the great halfback cuts downfield and breaks away for another score.
Steve Van Buren, legitimately, is one of the greatest players in the history of the NFL.
If you're a football fan, you should be reading the chapter on Steve Van Buren.
There's not only a chapter on Van Buren, but his name filled the record books. He led the league in rushing in 4 of his 8 seasons and retired as the leading rusher in league history.
He was one of the greatest power backs in the history of the league.
If he got to the outside, you saw how really fast he was.
The combination of his speed and power made Van Buren a running back who transcended his era.
Van Buren was a player ahead of his time.
He's one of the few running backs who you could look at then, and in today's NFL, he would still be a star.
He's like Eddie George and Eric Dickerson.
Van Buren was John Riggins in the 40s.
This guy was a machine. He was Adrian Peterson, in the 1950s and 40s.
As many player comparisons there are for Van Buren, the running back earned as many nicknames.
Did you know Steve Van Buren had multiple nicknames?
He was called Supersonic Steve. He was called Wham Bam.
Including Moving Van. Now that's great. Moving Van Buren, amazing. Should be higher on the list just based on that.
When we said a snowstorm, we really mean it.
Neither snow nor rain put the brakes on Moving Van Buren. The running back kicked it into gear, delivering 2 great championship performances.
With the championship riding on his shoulders, Steve Van Buren blasts off right tackle for the game-winning touchdown.
Which, by the way, was the only touchdown in the game to win the title.
Supersonic Steve led the Eagles to 2 straight NFL championships in 1948 and 49, rushing for a combined 294 yards.
I saw the one of him in the mud in Los Angeles.
In ankle-high mud, he runs for 196 yards. This guy was the ultimate power back workhorse of his era.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for the greatest Eagle of them all, number 15, Steve Van Buren.
While we didn't make him the greatest Eagle, some thought he should be higher.
I think he's a guy you can make a case for, 1 or 2.
I have Steve Van Buren, number 2. Steve Van, the moving van.
I'd only put 2 Eagles over Steve Van Buren.
The number 2 greatest Eagle, Reggie White.
I think if you were looking at the greatest Philadelphia Eagle, because you could argue that this player is top 10 maybe in the history of the game, you'd probably have to look at Reggie White. Reggie White was a dominant player in so many different ways.
If you look back at his time with the Eagles, he had more sacks than games played. He was the model of consistency.
The Eagles went to another level with Reggie White, so it's hard for me to imagine that anybody could rank number 1 over Reggie White.
After a 2-year stint with the USFL's Memphis Showboats, Reggie White landed in Philadelphia in 1985 and made an immediate impact.
The first game he ever played, he had 2 sacks.
Reggie White just acquired. He's going to be a force.
He was so big, yet so quick.
It was unfair when he went against offensive linemen. It was such a mismatch. Everyone he went up against, it was unfair.
And Reggie White came in unmolested.
You have to double cover him, triple cover him. There was nothing that would work. Reggie White was the single most dominant defensive lineman ever.
Never had fewer than 11 sacks in a season in Philadelphia. Imagine being an opposing quarterback and looking across the line and seeing Reggie White bearing down on you.
I will put up the 1987 strike-shortened season with any season that any NFL player's ever had. 21 sacks in 12 games. Absolutely astonishing.
That 1987 season by Reggie White may have been the greatest defensive season of all time. It's one of the reasons I think he should be number 1 on this list. I mean, he would do stuff that just cracked you up, and you wouldn't expect it. I mean, he did some impersonations that were really good.
I'm gonna hit you hard.
He did a great Muhammad Ali.
I'm the greatest in the world.
He did a remarkably good Rodney Dangerfield.
I tell you, my coach Buddy Ryan, I tell you, so ugly. When they cried tears go down the back of his head, avoid his face, I tell you.
There was a side of him that was kind of like a little kid.
Eagle fans didn't find it funny when Reggie left Philly for Green Bay.
I still don't quite understand why you couldn't find the money to keep Reggie White. He's Reggie White.
To see him go to the Green Bay Packers and win a Super Bowl and not with the Eagles, it just really ruined whatever was left of my childhood and my innocence.
I remember him as a Packer because of the Super Bowl, but his years in Philadelphia were filthy.
He's an Eagle. Reggie White is an Eagle. I know God told him to go to Green Bay, but he's an Eagle.
Reggie White was the best player in Eagles history. There's no question he was the best player in Eagles history.
When you look at Reggie White, I can't go number 1. I think he's in the perfect spot at number 2 because he did never win here. We're talking about success as an Eagle. Number 2 is the perfect spot for him.
And now, the greatest Eagle, Chuck Bednarik.
Chuck Bednarik has to be number 1 because when I was younger, I had an internship and there was a picture of Chuck Bednarik on the wall. And they said, "Do you know who that is?" And someone said, "No." And I kid you not, they fired the intern on the spot. In Philadelphia, if you don't know who Chuck Bednarik is, just leave the room because they're not going to embrace you and it's embarrassing.
Our number 1 Eagle had one of the best nicknames in all of sports.
Concrete Charlie. People think They called him Concrete Charlie because it seemed like he was made of concrete, which is true enough. No one's going to argue that. But he really got the nickname because his off-season job was he worked for the Warner Concrete Company as a concrete salesman.
If you could be nicknamed anything, wouldn't you want concrete in front of your name? Concrete, there's something that just, concrete. You ever see his hands? His hands look like they're made out of concrete.
You know, I got a crooked finger and...
My hands look like they were made out of flower petals compared to him.
The key to the Eagles may be number 60, Chuck Bednarik. The 12-year veteran will probably be called on to play both ways.
It's unfathomable in this day and age to be able to play every single play of any sporting event.
That's Chuck at offensive center opening a hole for Ted Dean. Here's Chuck on defense fighting off a block to bottle up Bobby Mitchell for a loss.